The November wind cut like a knife across the Wyoming territory, carrying the promise of an early winter as Jake Sullivan hunched forward in his saddle, one hand gripping the reins of his chestnut stallion, the other pressed against his Colt Navy revolver. Even through the howling gale, he heard it, 3 gunshots in rapid succession, then a fourth after a pause. Not hunting shots. Trouble. Jake nudged his horse toward the sound, moving cautiously through the mounting snowfall. The former Army scout knew better than to rush blindly toward gunfire, but something in those shots, their desperate rhythm, pulled him forward through the gathering darkness. When he crested the ridge overlooking Devil's Pass, he saw it, a stagecoach overturned in the snow, its right wheel shattered, 4 bodies sprawled around it like discarded dolls. Blood stained the pristine white ground, steam still rising from it in the frigid air. Jake dismounted, his boots crunching in the fresh snow as he approached with his revolver drawn. 20 years of frontier life had taught him caution. The bodies were fresh, 2 men in expensive Eastern suits, the driver, and a woman in a blue traveling dress, all shot with precision, the work of professionals. As Jake examined the coach, a sound froze him in place. Not the wind, something else. A whimper, so faint he almost missed it. Dropping to his knees, he peered beneath the overturned coach. There, secured inside a small trunk, padded with blankets, lay an infant boy no more than 6 months old, his tiny face red from crying, but alive. Beside the trunk sat a Colt Navy revolver with custom pearl grips and a silver-frame photograph showing a well-dressed family, the same faces now lifeless in the snow. The photograph bore an inscription, "To Thomas, Silver Creek Ranch." Jake's weathered face hardened as he lifted the child from its hiding place. This was no random robbery. He'd seen professional hits before during his time hunting bounties. Someone wanted these people dead. All of them. As he cradled the infant inside his buckskin coat, Jake spotted something that made his blood run cold. A scrap of red bandana caught on a jagged piece of the coach. Embroidered on it was the unmistakable outline of a rattlesnake, the calling card of the Blackwell gang, the same outlaws who had gunned down his younger brother 3 years earlier. The memory of finding his brother's body, riddled with bullets outside a saloon in Deadwood, flashed through Jake's mind. He'd spent a year hunting the Blackwell gang after that, tracking them across 3 territories before the trail went cold. Now fate had brought their paths back together. Jake examined the bodies more carefully. The man in the finer suit had a signet ring bearing a distinctive H crest. Recognition dawned. John Harrington, owner of Silver Creek Ranch and half the silver mines in the territory. A man with powerful friends, and evidently more powerful enemies. The baby squirmed against Jake's chest, its cries growing weaker. The child wouldn't survive the night without proper care, and Jake was still half a day's ride from the nearest town. There was, however, one place closer, an old trading post near Eagle Creek, where an Apache medicine man once traded with the Army. Jake had used it years ago during his scouting days. "Hang on, little one," Jake whispered, mounting his horse with the infant secured inside his coat. "We're going to find you some help." Night had fully descended by the time Jake reached the trading post, a dilapidated wooden structure leaning slightly against the relentless wind. A thin trail of smoke from the chimney told him someone was inside, the first bit of luck he'd had all day. Dismounting carefully, Jake approached the door, the baby now still and alarmingly quiet against his chest. Before he could knock, instinct made him step sideways, just as a shotgun blast splintered the door frame where he had stood a second before. "I don't want trouble," called a woman's voice from inside. "Ride on." "I'm not looking for trouble either," Jake replied steadily, recognizing something in that voice. "I've got an infant here who's freezing to death. We need help." Silence stretched for several seconds before the door creaked open, revealing the barrel of a Winchester rifle and behind it, a pair of dark, fierce eyes that Jake recognized instantly, despite the years that had passed. "Elena White Fox," he said softly. The Apache woman's expression shifted from wariness to shock. "Jake Sullivan." Not a question. She lowered the rifle slightly. "I heard you were dead." "Not yet," he replied. "But this little one will be, if we don't get him warm and fed soon." Elena's eyes moved to the bundle in Jake's arms. For a moment, something like pain flashed across her face. Then she stepped aside, allowing him to enter the small, dimly lit cabin. Inside was sparse but functional, a small hearth with a fire, simple wooden furniture, supplies stacked along one wall. Jake noticed dried herbs hanging from the ceiling, a reminder of Elena's knowledge of traditional medicine. Elena set her rifle against the wall but kept it within reach. She didn't trust easily, never had, not since Jake had known her as a translator for his Army scouting unit. That was before the massacre at Wolf Creek, where her husband and newborn child had been killed when soldiers attacked their settlement despite the peace treaty. "Let me see the child," she said, her voice now professional, devoid of emotion. Jake carefully unwrapped the infant, who had grown dangerously quiet. The baby's skin was cool to the touch, his breathing shallow. Elena examined the child with practiced hands, then looked up at Jake, her expression grave. "He's starving and cold. Where did you find him?" "Stagecoach ambush near Devil's Pass. Everyone else was killed. Blackwell gang, by the looks of it." Elena's hands stilled momentarily at the name before she continued examining the baby. "This child needs milk, not the broth or water you've been trying to give him." Jake's shoulders slumped. "I know that. That's why I came here. I remembered the medicine man who lived here. My uncle, he died last winter," Elena said flatly. She hesitated, then added more softly, "But I can help the child." Jake watched as understanding dawned on him. "You can." "My son died 3 months ago," she said simply, her voice betraying no emotion, though her eyes told a different story. "My body still remembers." Without further explanation, Elena took the baby in her arms and sat on a wooden chair near the fire. She adjusted her deerskin dress and guided the infant to her breast. The child latched weakly at first, then with growing strength. Jake turned away, giving her privacy, and busied himself securing the cabin's door and windows. When he had finished, he glanced back to see Elena still feeding the baby. Her expression softened in a way he hadn't seen since before the Wolf Creek massacre. "Who would want this child dead?" she asked, breaking the silence. Jake pulled the silver frame photograph and signet ring from his pocket. "This is John Harrington and his family. He owns Silver Creek Ranch and half the mines in the territory. If this baby is his son, then he is heir to a fortune," Elena finished. "And someone wants that fortune badly enough to kill an entire family." Jake nodded grimly. "The Blackwell gang doesn't usually take contract killings. They're bank robbers, train hijackers. Someone paid them well." As the baby finished feeding, Elena wrapped him snugly in a clean blanket she produced from a trunk. She examined him more closely in the firelight, turning him gently. That's when she noticed it, a small birthmark behind the baby's ear, shaped like a crescent moon. "This mark," she said, showing Jake. "I've seen it before. The Harringtons all bear it. A family trait." Jake leaned closer. "You're sure?" Elena nodded. "I delivered John Harrington's sister's baby 2 summers ago. The same mark. This is truly the Harrington heir." Jake's hand moved unconsciously to his gun belt. "We might not have that time. If any of the Blackwell gang tracked me here..." His words were cut short by the unmistakable sound of approaching horses, their hooves muffled by the snow, but still audible to his trained ear. Jake moved quickly to the window, peering out into the darkness. "How many?" Elena asked, already rising with the baby clutched to her chest. "One rider coming fast, injured by the way he slumped in the saddle." Jake positioned himself beside the door, gun drawn as the rider approached. The horse stopped just outside and they heard a body fall heavily to the ground, followed by labored crawling and a weak knock. "Please," a man's voice gasped. "Help me!" Jake opened the door just enough to see a man collapsed on the porch, blood pooling beneath him from a gunshot wound to his shoulder. Jake recognized him instantly. Marcus Reed, a white hunter who had married into the Apache and sometimes traded information with Army scouts. "Get him inside," Elena commanded, already gathering medical supplies with one hand while holding the baby with the other. Jake dragged Marcus inside and barred the door behind them. The man's face was ashen from blood loss, his breathing ragged. "Blackwell," Marcus gasped as Elena examined his wound. "His whole gang. Coming this way." Jake's expression darkened. "How far?" "Few hours, maybe less." Marcus winced as Elena began cleaning his wound. "They're looking for the Harrington baby. Someone's paying them. A fortune." "Who?" Jake demanded. Marcus coughed, blood speckling his lips. "Frank Harrington, John's brother. Once, the mines, the empire." The pieces fell into place in Jake's mind. Frank Harrington, always in his successful brother's shadow, now making his move for the family fortune, with his brother, sister-in-law, and their escorts eliminated. All that stood in his way was one small child. "They don't know if the baby survived," Marcus continued, his voice growing weaker. "They're searching every outpost, every cabin." Elena's eyes met Jake's over Marcus's prone form. Without words, they both understood the gravity of their situation. The trading post, isolated and with minimal defenses, wouldn't withstand an assault from Blackwell's entire gang. "We need to fortify this place," Jake said, already moving toward the supplies stacked against the far wall, "and prepare for a fight." The next few hours passed in grim preparation. Jake moved furniture to create barricades, checked and loaded every weapon they had, and strategically positioned ammunition around the cabin for quick access. Elena treated Marcus's wound with a poultice of herbs that slowly stemmed the bleeding, then prepared what supplies she could for the baby. Outside, the storm intensified, snow piling against the windows and door. It would slow Blackwell's approach, but wouldn't stop them. Men like Samuel Blackwell, with his distinctive face scar and reputation for ruthless efficiency, didn't abandon lucrative contracts because of weather. As Elena finished securing the baby in a makeshift cradle fashioned from a drawer, she watched Jake methodically check the action on his Colt for the third time. "You've changed," she observed. "The Jake Sullivan I knew in the Army was more reckless." A ghost of a smile crossed Jake's weathered face. "Watching your brother die tends to burn the recklessness out of a man." Elena nodded, understanding all too well. "Why did you stop hunting Blackwell? The scouts said you tracked him for nearly a year." "The trail went cold in Montana," Jake replied, his voice tight. "I took other bounties, kept my ear to the ground. Figured our paths would cross again eventually." He glanced toward the baby, now sleeping peacefully. "Just didn't expect it to happen like this." A comfortable silence fell between them. Two warriors who had seen too much death, now united in protecting an innocent life. It was Marcus who broke that silence with a sudden coughing fit that brought both of them to his side. "Water," Elena said, and Jake quickly fetched a cup. After drinking, Marcus gripped Jake's arm with surprising strength. "There's something I didn't tell you." Jake leaned closer. "What is it?" "I wasn't riding from Blackwell," Marcus whispered, his eyes darting nervously to Elena and back. "I was riding to warn him." In one fluid motion, Jake's gun was pressed against Marcus's temple, his face a mask of cold fury. "Explain." "Frank Harrington paid me too," Marcus admitted, his voice trembling. "To track the baby if it survived, to confirm its death." Elena hissed something in Apache, her hand moving to the knife at her belt. "I changed my mind," Marcus continued desperately. When I found your tracks leading here, I knew Elena might be here. I couldn't let them kill a woman who saved so many of my wife's people. Jake's finger tightened on the trigger. Give me one reason I shouldn't put a bullet in your head right now. Because I can tell you exactly how Blackwell plans to attack, Marcus replied, and how many men he has. Information that might keep that baby alive? And why should we believe anything you say now? Elena demanded, her voice cold with betrayal. Marcus closed his eyes briefly. Because my wife is carrying our child. When Frank hired me, I thought it was just another tracking job. When I realized what he really wanted, his voice broke. I couldn't be part of killing a baby, not when I'm about to become a father myself. After a tense moment, Jake lowered his gun, though his eyes remained cold. Start talking. Marcus detailed Blackwell's force, 15 hardened outlaws, all experienced killers, and their typical assault tactics. As he spoke, Jake's military mind began formulating a defense strategy, weighing their meager resources against the coming threat. There's more, Marcus added. Frank has bought the loyalty of Sheriff Mills in Silver Creek. The law won't help you there. He's been planning this takeover for months. When Marcus finished, Jake stood and walked to the window, peering out at the snow-covered landscape, now illuminated by moonlight breaking through the clouds. The storm was passing, which meant Blackwell wouldn't be far behind. We can't stay here, Jake decided. This place is too exposed. We need to move while we still can. Elena nodded in agreement. The old army outpost near Thunder Ridge. It has stone walls, better defensive positions. 2 days' ride in good weather, Jake noted grimly. One day if we push hard and take the mountain pass, Elena countered. I know the way. Jake considered their options. Staying meant certain death when Blackwell arrived with his full force. Running meant risking the baby's health in harsh conditions and possibly being caught in the open. Neither choice was good, but only one offered any chance of survival. We leave in 20 minutes, Jake decided. Pack only what's essential. As Elena gathered supplies and prepared the baby for travel, Jake turned back to Marcus, who watched them with feverish eyes. What about him? Elena asked, her voice hard. Jake's expression was unreadable. We can't take him. He'll slow us down, and we can't fully trust him. You can't leave me here for Blackwell, Marcus pleaded. He'll make an example of me. You should have thought of that before taking Frank Harrington's money, Jake replied coldly. But I'm not leaving you to die either. In the end, they compromised. They couldn't bring Marcus, but Jake wouldn't leave him completely defenseless. They gave him a pistol with 2 bullets, supplies to last a day, and a small map showing a hidden cave 2 miles north. If you truly want redemption, Jake said as they prepared to leave, there's a cavalry patrol that regularly passes through Elkhorn Valley, 5 miles east. If you can reach them, tell them what's happening. Marcus nodded solemnly. I'll try. And Jake, watch the eastern ridge if you reach the outpost. Blackwell always positions a man with a long rifle there. As they mounted their horses, Jake on his chestnut stallion, Elena on a sturdy paint horse from the trading post's small stable, the baby securely wrapped and nestled against Elena's chest, Jake took one last look at the cabin that had briefly served as their sanctuary. Blackwell will follow our tracks when he finds this place, he said. Elena's expression was determined, her eyes bright in the moonlight. Then we'll be ready for him. With that, they urged their horses forward into the frigid night. The precious cargo they carried now bonding them in a mission neither had anticipated, but both had embraced fully. Behind them, Marcus watched from the cabin doorway, the pistol heavy in his hand as he contemplated his path to redemption. The mountains loomed ahead, their peaks silver in the moonlight, offering both peril and possible salvation for the unlikely trio fleeing into their depths. The baby, heir to the Harrington fortune and now the most hunted infant in the territory, slept peacefully, unaware of the desperate journey undertaken on his behalf, or the deadly pursuers who would stop at nothing to ensure he never reached his inheritance. They rode hard through the night, following game trails and frozen creek beds to minimize their tracks. Jake led the way, his years as an Army scout evident in how confidently he navigated the treacherous terrain. Elena followed closely, one arm securing the baby against her, the other handling the reins with practiced ease. Dawn broke cold and clear, the storm now behind them. They paused briefly in a sheltered grove to rest the horses and for Elena to feed the baby, who had weathered the night journey surprisingly well. "He's stronger today," Elena observed, a hint of pride in her voice as she nursed the infant. "A fighter like his father." Jake, keeping watch from the edge of the trees, nodded without turning. "He'll need to be." They allowed themselves only 15 minutes before continuing. The mountain pass Elena had mentioned lay just ahead, a narrow trail that wound between sheer rock faces before opening into the valley where the old Army outpost stood. It was their best route, but also the most dangerous, a perfect place for an ambush if Blackwell had somehow gotten ahead of them. Jake's instincts, honed by years of tracking both men and animals, sensed something wrong as they approached the pass entrance. He raised his hand, signaling Elena to stop. "What is it?" she whispered. "Not sure," he replied, dismounting and drawing his rifle. "Wait here." Moving silently despite his size, Jake advanced on foot, scanning the rocky terrain above the trail. A flash of sunlight on metal caught his eye. The barrel of a rifle, positioned on a ledge overlooking the pass entrance. Jake didn't hesitate. He raised his Winchester and fired 3 rapid shots at the hidden gunman. A cry of pain echoed through the mountains, followed by a body tumbling from the ledge to land broken on the rocks below. "Blackwell's men," Jake called back to Elena. "They've gotten ahead of us somehow." Even as he spoke, gunfire erupted from multiple positions along the pass. Bullets kicked up snow around Jake as he sprinted back to Elena and the horses. "They've cut us off," he said grimly, pulling himself into the saddle. "We need another route." Elena pointed to a steep trail leading higher into the mountains. "There's another way, through Crow Pass. It's treacherous, but they won't expect it." They spurred their horses away from the pass just as more of Blackwell's men emerged from hiding positions. Jake fired over his shoulder, dropping one outlaw from his horse, buying them precious seconds to reach the smaller trail Elena had indicated. The path quickly became a nightmare of narrow ledges and near-vertical climbs. Both riders dismounted, leading their reluctant horses by the reins. The baby, disturbed by the commotion, began to cry, the sound carrying ominously in the mountain air. "We need to silence him," Jake said urgently, scanning the slopes below where distant figures of pursuers were visible. Elena nodded, cradling the baby close and humming a low, soothing melody in Apache. Gradually the child quieted, lulled by her voice and the rhythmic swaying of her steps. They continued their grueling ascent, every muscle burning with exertion. Jake's wounded leg, an old injury from his Army days, throbbed mercilessly, but he pushed forward, knowing that stopping meant death. By midday, they had reached the highest point of Crow Pass, where the trail narrowed to a knife-edge ridge with precipitous drops on both sides. "We cross single file," Jake instructed. "I'll go first with both horses. You follow with the baby." Elena didn't argue. She transferred the sleeping infant to a secure sling across her chest, freeing both hands for the treacherous crossing. Jake led the way, coaxing the nervous horses step by careful step across the ridge. Wind whipped around them, threatening to unbalance man and beast alike. Halfway across, Jake's horse balked, nearly pulling him over the edge before he regained control. "Easy, boy," he murmured, stroking the animal's neck. "Almost there." When they finally reached the wider trail on the far side, Jake secured the horses and turned back to watch Elena's crossing. She moved with the natural grace he remembered from years ago, her feet finding secure placement where others might slip. The baby remained silent in his sling, as if sensing the need for absolute quiet. Just as Elena neared the end of the ridge, a rifle shot echoed through the mountains. The bullet struck rock inches from her foot, sending fragments flying. Elena stumbled but kept her balance, increasing her pace despite the danger. Jake spotted the shooter, one of Blackwell's men who had followed them up the treacherous trail. Without hesitation, Jake raised his rifle and fired. At this distance, it was a near impossible shot, but Jake Sullivan hadn't earned his reputation as one of the territory's deadliest marksmen for nothing. The outlaw crumpled, his body tumbling down the mountainside. Elena reached Jake's side, breathing hard but uninjured. "There will be more," she said. "I know," Jake replied, already helping her into the saddle. "But we've bought some time. The outpost is half a day's ride from the bottom of this pass." They descended more quickly than they had climbed, the trail widening as it wound down the far side of the mountain. By late afternoon, they had reached the valley floor, a vast expanse of snow-covered terrain stretching before them. In the distance, barely visible, stood the stone walls of the abandoned army outpost. "We'll make it by nightfall," Jake said, allowing himself a moment of cautious optimism. That optimism was shattered by the sight of riders emerging from the tree line behind them. At least 8 men, led by a tall figure on a black horse. Even at this distance, Jake recognized the distinctive silhouette of Samuel Blackwell. "Ride hard for the outpost," Jake ordered, checking his ammunition. "Don't stop for anything." Elena understood what he wasn't saying. "You're not sacrificing yourself, Jake Sullivan. That's not why we came this far." Jake met her fierce gaze with one of his own. "I don't plan on dying today, but one of us needs to reach that outpost with the baby, and you're the one keeping him alive." Before she could argue further, Jake slapped her horse's flank, sending it galloping toward the distant outpost. Then he turned to face the approaching riders, positioning his horse behind a fallen tree that would provide some cover. As Blackwell's men drew closer, Jake took aim with his rifle. His first shot dropped an outlaw from his saddle. His second wounded another's horse, causing confusion in their ranks. His third missed as the riders scattered, taking cover behind rocks and trees. Jake used the momentary respite to change position, moving laterally through the trees to confuse his attackers. A volley of bullets splintered bark around him, but none found their mark. For the next 20 minutes, Jake played a deadly game of cat and mouse, using his superior knowledge of terrain and guerrilla tactics to inflict damage while staying mobile. He wounded 2 more of Blackwell's men and killed a third, but they kept coming, pushing him steadily back toward the outpost. Jake's ammunition was running dangerously low when he heard a welcome sound, rifle fire from the direction of the outpost. Elena had reached the stone walls and was providing covering fire from an elevated position. With renewed determination, Jake mounted his horse and made a desperate dash for the outpost, zigzagging to make himself a harder target. Bullets whizzed past him, one grazing his arm, another taking his hat. When his horse stumbled, hit in the flank by a lucky shot, Jake abandoned it and continued on foot, running with the desperate energy of a man who had found something worth living for. By the time he reached the outpost gates, which Elena flung open at his approach, darkness was falling. Jake collapsed inside as Elena secured the heavy wooden doors behind him. Blood soaked his left sleeve, and his breathing came in ragged gasps. "The baby?" he managed to ask between breaths. "Safe," Elena replied, already examining his wound. "Sleeping inside." Jake allowed himself a moment of relief before pushing himself to his feet. Blackwell won't attack in the dark. He's cautious, methodical. We have until morning to prepare. The abandoned outpost, built to withstand attacks from hostile tribes, offered better protection than the trading post had. Its stone walls stood 12 feet high, enclosing a courtyard and 3 buildings, a barracks, a command post, and a stable. Time and neglect had weakened some structures, but the fundamental defenses remained sound. As Elena tended to Jake's wound, a painful but non-lethal gash across his upper arm. They took inventory of their resources. 2 rifles with limited ammunition, Jake's Colt revolver, Elena's Winchester, a handful of knives, and whatever supplies Elena had managed to bring from the trading post. Not enough to hold off 8 men, Jake observed grimly. 7 now, Elena corrected, tightening a bandage around his arm. Maybe 6, depending on how badly you wounded the last one. Jake managed a tired smile. Still not great odds. They worked through the night, setting traps around the perimeter, creating defensive positions, and preparing for the assault they knew would come at dawn. The baby woke twice for feeding, his cries a stark reminder of why they fought so hard against such overwhelming odds. During a brief rest, sitting back to back near the small fire they'd built in the command post, Jake and Elena shared a rare moment of peace. "Why did you stay at the trading post all these years?" Jake asked. "After Wolf Creek, I figured you'd go back to your people." Elena was silent for so long, Jake thought she wouldn't answer. Finally, she said, "There was nothing to go back to. My husband was dead. My son—" Her voice caught. The trading post was neutral ground, neither white nor Apache, like me. Jake nodded, understanding. "And now? After this is over, if we survive?" "I don't plan beyond today," she replied simply. "I learned that lesson at Wolf Creek." Jake turned to face her, his expression unusually vulnerable in the firelight. "I never thought I'd have a chance at being a father," he said quietly, glancing toward the sleeping infant. "Never thought I deserved it after some of the things I've done." Elena studied him with those penetrating dark eyes. "We don't get what we deserve in this life, Jake Sullivan. We get what we fight for." As dawn approached, they took their positions, Jake at the main gate with both rifles, Elena at a window in the command post with her Winchester, the baby secured in an inner room where he would be safest from stray bullets. The first light of day revealed what they already knew. Samuel Blackwell and his remaining men had surrounded the outpost during the night. They had positioned themselves behind rocks and fallen trees, creating a ring of death around the stone walls. Just as Marcus had warned, a man with a long rifle was visible on the eastern ridge. A voice called out from behind a large boulder. "Sullivan, I know it's you in there. This doesn't have to end badly for everyone." Jake didn't respond immediately, taking time to identify the speaker's position before answering. "Seems like it's already ended badly for several of your men, Blackwell." A harsh laugh echoed across the snow-covered ground. "Always the comedian, even when you were hunting me after I put your brother in the ground." Jake's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice steady. "What's Frank Harrington paying you that's worth losing your whole gang?" A pause suggested Jake's knowledge of the contract had surprised Blackwell. "Enough to retire on," he finally replied. "The baby's the last loose end. Hand him over, and you and the woman can ride away." "We both know that's not true," Jake called back. "You've seen our faces. Frank would just hire you to hunt us down next." Instead of answering, Blackwell signaled to his men. Gunfire erupted from all sides, bullets pinging off stone walls and splintering wooden shutters. Jake and Elena returned fire selectively, conserving their precious ammunition, while attempting to keep the attackers pinned down. The first assault lasted nearly an hour, with neither side gaining advantage. 2 more of Blackwell's men fell to the defenders' accurate fire, but the outlaws had succeeded in damaging the outpost's main gate, weakening it to the point where a determined rush might break through. During a lull in the fighting, Elena moved to Jake's position, her face streaked with gunpowder. 4 bullets left," she reported grimly. Jake handed her his Colt. 6 in this. Make them count." They both knew the reality. Without reinforcements or a miracle, they couldn't hold out much longer. The baby's cries from the inner room seemed to emphasize the desperate nature of their situation. "One of us needs to get through," Jake said quietly. "Take the baby to Silver Creek, to Judge Parker in Fort Smith." He's known for his honesty. Even Frank Harrington can't buy him. Elena's eyes narrowed. And how does one of us get through 7 armed men? Distraction, Jake replied, his voice resigned but determined. I'll draw their fire at the south wall. You take the baby and go out the back, through the old supply tunnel. Your horse is still fresh enough to outrun any pursuit. Elena gripped his arm. That's suicide, Jake. Maybe, he acknowledged, but it gives the baby a chance. And you. Before Elena could argue further, a new sound reached them. Hoofbeats approaching fast from the east, accompanied by the unmistakable jingle of cavalry tack. Jake and Elena exchanged a puzzled glance before Jake risked a look from a narrow window. What he saw made his breath catch. A full detachment of U.S. cavalry, at least 20 men, galloping toward the outpost with rifles raised. Outside, Blackwell and his men had also heard the approaching riders. Shouts of alarm rose as the outlaws scrambled for their horses, suddenly more concerned with escape than completing their contract. The cavalry, however, had no intention of allowing escape. They surrounded Blackwell's scattered men with military precision. A voice through a bullhorn ordered the outlaws to surrender, emphasizing the point with a warning volley fired over their heads. Most of Blackwell's remaining men, seeing the hopelessness of their position, threw down their weapons. Samuel Blackwell himself, however, made a desperate break for freedom, spurring his black horse toward a gap in the cavalry line. Jake watched from the window as the outlaw leader nearly made it, until a single shot from the cavalry captain's revolver caught him in the back, sending him tumbling from his saddle into the blood-stained snow. When the cavalry lieutenant pounded on the outpost gate, Jake opened it cautiously, rifle still ready. Lieutenant James Mercer, 7th Cavalry, the young officer introduced himself. Are you Jake Sullivan? Jake nodded, puzzled. How did you know to come here? A rider reached our patrol yesterday, Apache man, badly wounded. Said you were protecting the Harrington heir from assassins. The lieutenant glanced around. Looks like he was telling the truth. Jake and Elena exchanged a surprised look. Marcus had not betrayed them after all. Despite his injuries and the danger, he had made it to the cavalry patrol and sent help. There's more, the lieutenant continued. We received a telegraph from Judge Parker in Fort Smith. Frank Harrington has been arrested in Silver Creek. One of Blackwell's wounded men talked after being captured near Devil's Pass. Confessed the whole plot. The news washed over Jake like a physical wave, relief replacing the tension that had sustained him for days. Behind him, Elena appeared with the baby in her arms, her expression guarded but hopeful. What about Sheriff Mills? Jake asked, remembering Marcus's warning about the corrupt lawman. Under arrest as well, Mercer confirmed. The judge sent federal marshals to handle it personally. Apparently, this plot goes deeper than just Frank Harrington trying to inherit his brother's fortune. There are mining contracts with the railroad at stake, millions of dollars. Is it over? Elena asked softly. Jake looked at the cavalry rounding up the surviving outlaws, then at the child who had brought him and Elena together in a way neither could have anticipated. The baby, Thomas Harrington, rightful heir to Silver Creek and its fortune, gurgled contentedly in Elena's arms, oblivious to the danger that had nearly claimed his young life. Yes, Jake replied, allowing himself to believe it. I think it's over. 3 months later, Jake Sullivan stood on the porch of the main house at Silver Creek Ranch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in hues of gold and crimson. His new role as the ranch's security chief and temporary guardian to young Thomas Harrington fit him better than he would have expected. The restlessness that had driven him for years had been replaced by something he'd never thought to find. Purpose beyond revenge, beyond the next bounty. The sound of approaching footsteps made him turn. Elena, dressed now in a practical combination of frontier and Apache clothing that suited her independent spirit, joined him at the railing. In her arms, Thomas, healthy, growing, and increasingly curious about the world around him, reached out a tiny hand toward Jake's weathered face. "He knows who protected him," Elena said, a rare smile softening her features. "Children sense these things." Jake gently took the baby, still somewhat awkward, but increasingly comfortable with the role thrust upon him by circumstance and choice. "The judge finalized the guardianship papers today," he informed her. "Thomas will inherit everything when he comes of age. Until then, we keep him safe," Elena finished. Their eyes met in the fading light, an unspoken understanding passing between them. They weren't a conventional family by any means. A former bounty hunter with too much blood on his hands, an Apache woman caught between two worlds, and an orphaned heir to a fortune. But they had forged something real and enduring through fire and sacrifice. As darkness settled over Silver Creek Ranch, Jake found himself recounting the tumultuous events that had brought them here. Frank Harrington's trial had been swift, the evidence overwhelming once his co-conspirators started talking. The railroad contracts John had secured before his death would ensure Thomas's future wealth, and Judge Parker had appointed a board of trustees, with Jake and Elena at its head, to manage the Harrington holdings until Thomas came of age. More surprising had been the community's acceptance of their unusual arrangement. The story of how they had protected the baby against overwhelming odds had spread throughout the territory, transforming Jake from a feared bounty hunter to a respected guardian, and Elena from an outsider to a woman admired for her courage and compassion. Marcus Reed had survived his wounds and testified against Frank Harrington, earning a pardon for his own minor role in the conspiracy. He and his Apache wife had settled on a small homestead nearby, their newborn daughter a frequent visitor to Thomas, forming a bond that would likely last a lifetime. "Do you ever regret it?" Elena asked suddenly, breaking into Jake's thoughts. "Taking on this responsibility?" Jake looked down at the child in his arms, then at the woman beside him. "Not for a second," he answered truthfully. "My brother always said I needed something to live for, not just things to kill for. Took me long enough to understand what he meant." Elena's hand found his on the railing, a simple gesture that conveyed more than words could. "We make our own family in this life," she said softly, "sometimes in the most unexpected ways." On a distant ridge, visible only as a silhouette against the darkening sky, a lone rider watched the ranch house through a spyglass. Victor Harrington, Frank's son and John's nephew, lowered the glass with a scowl. His father might be in prison awaiting execution, but the family fortune was still out there, just beyond his reach. The boy was the only obstacle. "Enjoy your peace while it lasts, Sullivan," he muttered, turning his horse away. He would bide his time, gather allies, and when the moment was right, he would reclaim what he believed should have been his father's. The watcher rode off into the gathering darkness. For now at least, the guardian of the West had earned his peace,